I wrote an essay that got published about a Twilight Zone episode called A Stop at Willoughby. And A Stop at Willoughby was memorable because it was not just a horror or fantasy episode, it was a critique of certain aspects of the traditional male role. And equally important, perhaps more importantly, it was a critique of misplaced nostalgia. And in fact, this is something that came up quite frequently in Twilight Zone. I suspect it might have been something that haunted Rod Serling. Very often the protagonist was someone who either had a romanticized nostalgia for a historical period or for his own childhood. Okay, and I remember somebody who just deeply craved to go back to his childhood where he could just enjoy himself and play all the time. And he magically goes back to his childhood, and the other kids all beat him up because he's a nerd. Okay, and the problem, of course, with historical nostalgia is that time period, through a television show, The Waltons, Little House on the Prairie. A lot of people, associate the 1950s with Leave It to Beaver, Ozzie and Harriet. Actually, those shows actually aired in the 60s, or at least partly in the 60s. Or they know the period from paintings. The protagonist in A Stop at Willoughby compares what he had seen at Willoughby to a Currier and Ives painting. The people who lived in that era did not see it as a paradise. They saw it probably as a time of great ferment and change, just like we see our own period as a time of great ferment and change. And yeah, but as I've spoken before, I think a lot of people, and this does tend to be more common among conservatives, tend to romanticize past time periods. They're not the only ones, though. And they yearn to turn back the calendar. Now, I have seen some shows on Hooked on the Look and, things about people's obsessions where they have constructed homes and where they pattern themselves after the 1950s, the Victorian era. One guy tries to live in like it's 1948. It's a free country, you can do that. But we can't, as a society, do that. And we have to also understand that, the 1950s wasn't Leave It to Beaver. the Old West, wasn't the Waltons or Little House on the Prairie. You can get a very distorted picture from just looking at pictures. We have to move forward. We also, the idea also of making any kind of reparations for past wrongs that occurred, over 100 years ago, 150